The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who, for 1 hour, will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, faithful followers. So who is this Babylon? In Revelation 18, after this I saw an angel come down from heaven. He had a great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice, a shout, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become the dwelling for demons, and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries." Now, just because she's fallen doesn't mean that she's not still in existence. I'd just like to add, because when something's fallen, it's fallen like the dragon was cast out of heaven, was cast out of the high places, spiritual wickedness on high places. She's been cast out from power and control. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive in her plagues, for her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given, pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit enthroned as a queen. I am not a widow, I will never mourn." And this is a really interesting statement, because Israel was to be the wife of the Messiah in the marriage ceremony. But this woman here has killed her husband, her king, Jesus, and she tells everyone that she's not a widow and she will never mourn. Now, who does that? Who never mourns the death of Jesus? The people that persecute him and deny him. The people that said, "We have no king but Caesar." Therefore, in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. When the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, "Woe, woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon! In 1 hour your doom has come." The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple silk and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, of wine and olive oil, and fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and human beings sold as slaves. Now, what does this remind you of? This reminds me of the Silk Road. Jerusalem was a very powerful stronghold on the Silk Road, and with its trades, King Solomon is proof of that, with his trading with Tyre, of the Tyrian purple, and the gold and taxes that were given to Solomon from the king of Tyre, which ironically added up to the number 666. They will say, "The fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your luxury and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, 'Woe, woe to you, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, glittered with gold, precious stones and pearls. In 1 hour such great wealth has been brought to ruin.' Every sea captain, Tyrian, and all who travel by ship, the sailors, and all who earn her living from the sea will stand far off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, 'Was there ever a city like this city?' They will throw dust on their heads and will weep with weeping and mourning cry out, "Woe, woe to you, great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets. For God has judged her with judgment she imposed on you." Now remember when the Crusader state or kingdom of Jerusalem was set up, the Venetian and Genoan capitals wanted a quarter in the city. It was France and Venice that attacked Constantinople as they wanted control of the trade that was coming through Constantinople. So, we have, after the fall of the Silk Road, due to the Ottoman Empire and this Iron Curtain, as they've called it, of Islam that stopped the Silk Road trade from China all the way through to Europe, they had to go on the sea route. It was the sea, people in their boats, and this is how trade continued on after the fall of the Silk Road. This was the rise of the Dutch East India Company or the British East India Company, and we know who ruled both of those companies. It only takes a small amount of investigation as to who was still running trade on the sea routes. The finality of Babylon's doom. Then the mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, "With such violence a great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music of harpists and musicians, pipers and trumpets will never be heard in you again. No worker of any trade will ever be found in you again. Sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of the bridegroom and the bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's important people. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. In her was found the blood of prophets and of God's holy people, of all who have been slaughtered on the earth." So who murdered the prophets and the saints? Jerusalem and the temple political system of Jerusalem. So when we look at early photos of Jerusalem before the current occupation and during the Ottoman Empire, it was basically a wasteland. I've heard of stories, I think it was Mark Twain maybe traveled to Jerusalem, and they said that it was a desert wasteland. There was nothing there. Here's the quote from Mark Twain: "In Palestine, a hopeless, dreary, heartbroken land." It says in 1867, Mark Twain made a visit to the land of Israel. What did Twain think of the Holy Land? So prior to his departure, Twain had signed a contract to write 51 short articles during the journey. The letters he penned while in Palestine were combined with articles he wrote later on, the result being The Innocents Abroad, a book which detailed his impression of this strange country he encountered. So what did the famous author think of the land of Israel? On September 24th, 1867, the author brought an elegant-looking Bible for his mother. He asked the shop owner he purchased it from to inscribe the word Jerusalem on the cover in Hebrew, probably to impress his anxious mother before sending it to the United States. But in truth, Twain was not at all impressed by what he witnessed in the Holy Land. From the long-awaited moment they arrived in the country, Twain hastened to dismiss the religious devotion shown by the rest of the party. According to his reports, his fellow travelers took every opportunity to cry and pray hysterically, but they also never missed an opportunity to remove antiques from their resting place to take home as souvenirs. In sharp contrast to his fellow travelers, Twain neither sang nor gushed upon crossing into the Holy Land and laying his eyes on the River Dan. He determined that its banks and those of the book are respectively adorned with blooming oleanders, but the unattainable beauty of the spot will not throw a well-balanced man into convulsions, as the Syrian book of travel would lead one to suppose. said the residents of the area seemed pretty petty and narrow-eyed, and the exorbitant prices they offered to the pilgrims only reinforced his views. On the banks of the Sea of Galilee, while imagining Jesus giving his teachings to the local fishermen and Josephus commanding his fleet of warships, the pilgrims tried to barter for a ride on one of the locals' boats. After an unreasonable price of 2 Napoleons was put forth, the innocents countered with an offer of only 1. They were then shocked to see the fishermen turn around and sail off, leaving them stranded on the shore. Okay, so Twain was fed up with the primitiveness of the settlements and roads he encountered. The further he went, the hotter the sun got, the more rocky and bare, repulsive and dreary the landscape became. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Even the olive and the cactus, those fast friends of a worthless soil, had almost deserted the country. The statement reflects his general attitude to the ancient land thought throughout his journey. One exception to the rule was the city of Jerusalem, which Twain described in glowing terms. Perched on its eternal hills, white and domed and solid, massed together and hooped with high grey walls, the venerable city gleamed in the sun. So small, why, it was no larger than an American village of 4,000 inhabitants. Tears would have been out of place. The thoughts Jerusalem suggests are full of poetry, sublimity, and more than all dignity. Such thoughts do not find their appropriate expression in the emotions of the nursery. A central motive that weaves through Twain's writings is the polarization between American progress and the enslavement of the Holy Land to its own past. In his opinion, it was precisely the reverence of the 3 religions towards the land of Israel that was responsible for the miserable state he perceived it to be in. In one of the sharpest and most beautiful passages in the book, Twain states that Palestine is desolate and unlovely. And why should it be otherwise? Can the curse of the deity beautify a land? Palestine is no more of this work-day world. It is sacred to poetry and tradition. It is a dream land. Now, why would he say, that the city was so small, what was left of it? And in Revelation, it says here that the great city split into 3 parts and the cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her a cup filled with wine of the fury of his wrath. Every island fled away and the mountains could not be found. From the sky, huge hailstones which weighed about 100 pounds fell on people, and they cursed God and on account of the plague of hail, because the plague was so terrible. Now, is it possible that Jerusalem had been rebuilt and this is all that's left of it, a village of 4,000 people? I mean, when we go back into Bible times, Josephus states that from around 600,000 to 1.1 million people were killed by the Romans in Jerusalem. And we're talking about a city that was very great and wealthy. It was a prize to the Romans. There was obviously something about it. It brought in a lot of money and taxes, and it would have been a very grand city. So this is all that's left of it, a village of 4,000 people with some buildings left that are, as Mark Twain points out, no more than sacred poetry or a dreamland. It's the attachment of the 3 faiths, which did destroy it in the Crusades, that gives this land any value. It's a wasteland. As the Bible says in Revelation, this city has been left as a wasteland. Even though it's been restored today to what we know of Israel or Jerusalem, they still are unable to restore it to its former glory, because these 3 faiths have literally or figuratively split the city into 3, and they cannot establish their temple, they cannot establish their priesthood, and they cannot establish their political, religious hold over the world. And I'm guessing that the god of the Zohar isn't quite ready to return the old temple they had back from heaven. So it's possible that the great earthquake happened and destroyed much of the city, and it was rebuilt by the Ottoman Empire of the Turks, or at least made livable and rebuilt upon. Here's an image of Jerusalem during the Palestinian occupation of the Ottomans, and there's really not much left to it. A few buildings. People say that they've never seen the city of Jerusalem divided into 3, but we don't know what it looked like before we know what it looks like now. So there's some pictures from Ottoman Palestine. It's just dirt and rocks. Here's some pictures of Jerusalem back in the Palestinian Ottoman Jerusalem. It says these photos were taken between 1898 and 1914 when Palestine was under the Ottoman occupation. Here's some more pictures. Jerusalem. No doubt the buildings that are left are beautiful, and I guess you could call it mysterious. If we look at the official reason behind the fall of the Silk Road, it says decline of the Silk Road, why the Great Silk Road became unpopular. After the great geographical discoveries in late 15th and early 16th century, the intercontinental overland trade routes fell into decay. Spread of the sea transport and the possibility to carry more goods, relative cheapness of transport resulted in the decline of the Silk Road in the end of the 15th century. Although some of the routes, especially those in high mountainous areas connecting to Tajikistan, Afghanistan, China, Pakistan and India, existed until the beginning of the 20th century. That was probably just because these regions are very remote and this is how they got goods into these areas. Like in remote areas of Nepal, everything's carried in baskets on people's backs. So with the Silk Road and the Crusades, it says the Silk Road was actually a 4,000-mile long network of routes stretched westward from China across Asia, deserts and mountain ranges through the Middle East until it reached the Mediterranean Sea. What really caused the Silk Road was greed and the want of more land. Silk was very valuable at this time. No one in the world ever knew about it or how to make it. It was so secret that if you told someone out of China how to make the silk, you would be killed. During the Han Dynasty, goods from other countries were very valuable. Trade increased due to the fact that the Han armies conquered land in Central Asia. Farther west, people wanted that silk. Emperor Wudi wanted strong Central Asian horses for his army. Then the Central Asian people would trade the silk with the other countries for other products. They also needed a safe way to trade from Asia to Europe. They traded in packs called caravans, so it was safer. The armies also protected the traders from the thieves. Also, people wanted resources that could not be found anywhere they were. So there are many people involved in the Silk Road, such as the Chinese, the Europeans, the Central Asians. During the Crusades, Crusaders would walk 5,000 miles just to get to the Holy Land. On their way there, they would cross through the Silk Road. Many Crusaders were greedy and wanted fame and fortune instead of glory, so they brought silk and fled from their armies. After bringing these products home, many people wanted silk and porcelain. This increased profit on the Silk Road. One of the most important people involved was Genghis Khan. So we can see the purpose of this crusade had little to do with wanting to convert or rescue the people in Palestine from the infidel. It was all about trade and money and the banking elite of those days who wanted to re-establish that trade network. So according to the Jewish Virtual Library, following the Ottoman conquest of 1517, the land was divided into 4 distinct and attached administratively to the province of Damascus and ruled from Istanbul. At the outside of the Ottoman area, an estimated 1,000 Jewish families lived in the country, mainly in Jerusalem, Nablus, Shechem, Hebron, Gaza, and Safed, and the villages of Galilee. The community was comprised of descendants of Jews who had never left the land, and as well as immigrants from North Africa and Europe. In Revelation, we see how the city was divided into 3. Is this possibly not referring to an actual earthquake dividing the city, but the splitting of the city up into the 3 quarters of Roman Catholicism, Judaism, and Islam? So it says, and the cities and the nations collapsed. So at this point in time, whatever happened, the systems and cities of the nations fell apart. And we've had this great schism caused by these 3 faiths. So it's possible that this earthquake that is being referred to is something literal, but also something momentous to the political and religious systems of the earth. And the great city is split into 3. And we know today that Jerusalem is split into 3. So here in this article, it's telling us main religious quarters, Jerusalem, the 4 quarters of the old city. So it's the Muslim quarter is the largest and most densely populated of the old city. The Jewish quarter, absolutely unmissable in the Jewish quarter, is Haram Esh Sharif, enclosure of the noble sanctuary. And the Christian quarter, I'd like to put that as the Roman Catholic quarter. And it's a quarter because there's 4. The Armenian quarter, being small and lacking in momentum of particular importance, is the least known and considered. So I dare say the Armenian quarter is lumped in with the Roman Catholic Christian quarter because of the Armenian Orthodox belief. So here we have an image of the Armenian Orthodox Church, and it looks very Roman Catholic. We've got the Mother Goddess with the child, the sun worship. We've got the fish Midas hats. It's very Roman Catholic. It's just another schism or daughter of this whore system. So going on this religious system, which is really what the book of Revelation is about. It's about religious and political systems. We have the city of Jerusalem being divided after the Crusades into 3. And if we could put an image to each one of these quarters or thirds, really, we would have the Islamic beast of the earth, we would have the Roman beast of the sea, and we would have the dragon, Kabbalistic run Rothschild state of Israel. And also, just like to add, if we look at the book of Revelation and the city of Jerusalem, the Revelation refers to Jerusalem as the whore. We know it's the system of church and state. It's where it's originated from. The temple with the high priest and the kingdom with the king, who at the time of Jesus was Herod the Edomite, and a Roman client king also. The whole book of Revelation is about this system, this Babylonian system. And so a lot of the scriptures are metaphorical. I do believe a lot of them are literal as well. So if there was a great earthquake at this time, possibly I'm thinking around the time of the Crusades, then the city would have been divided. But also the ground-shaking event of the Crusades that divided the 3 religions and destroyed the Silk Road. And I think in our modern culture, the energy and emotions of people and groups and the effects on our planet from their combined energy are underrated. I remember the day of the earthquake in Melbourne. Melbourne is not well known for earthquakes. They're quite rare, and if we do have earthquakes, they're very small. And Australia is not really a country that has many earthquakes either. They are very mild in comparison to other countries on fault lines. Before the tradies protest against being forced into medical interventions that they didn't want, there was a lot of tension in the air in the city of Melbourne, and it was the second day of protesting, and in the morning before the protest was beginning, Melbourne experienced a magnitude 5.9 earthquake, and it was like the earthquake was a result of the built up anxiety of the people of the state. Many say that it was direct energy weapons. I don't believe that, because I think, if anything, the earthquake damaged a lot of buildings in Melbourne. I know for a fact that Melbourne's tallest building was damaged, and that would have cost a lot of money and needed a lot of structural reports. I also think that if that was the case, it was not beneficial to these people at all. We know that the Silk Road trading was destroyed via the fact that the Christians and the Muslims didn't get along, and this is how the Radahite Jews and the Khazarians were able to be the middleman of this system. But also, the Book of Revelation being divided into almost 3 sort of sections, or as I'd like to say, feasts, show 3 different incarnations of the city of Jerusalem, or Israel. We have the first, which is the city of Herod, and the city that we see Jesus and the apostles come from, which was destroyed by the Romans. The second, we have this resurrection of Jerusalem and Israel in the version of the Crusader Knights and the beasts, which appear to me to correspond with the Crusader kingdoms and beasts of the Holy Roman Empire and the renewed Roman Empire via Constantine, with the religious whore riding it at this time. And then we have the third incarnation of Israel after the Ottoman reign, which seems to be what we have today. And I'm just asking the question, is it possible that this third incarnation is what started the little season of Satan? Because what we have is, after the Ottoman Empire and Israel being a wasteland, we have this new Israel and this new Jerusalem, the third temple, if you want to put it that way. Everyone's looking for a third temple, but is it just a third incarnation of Israel? Because after the destruction of Jerusalem in the time of the Crusades and the battles of the Crusades, it turned to a wasteland. And what we see of Jerusalem today is nothing compared to what it was over that period of time where it laid waste pretty much. And it was inaccessible to the kings of the earth. But it's extremely valuable to the dragon system of the bankers of our modern time, who waged 2 world wars to gain occupation of this territory. As I like to say, the Neo-Crusades. It took the First World War to get the Balfour Declaration signed and to destroy the Ottoman Empire, which was stopping them from going in and reclaiming this region. And it took the Second World War to force the people who didn't want to go back there to return. And now we find out that these people don't even belong there. They never wanted to go there. They don't belong there. And now they're re-establishing the big Israel, including the Ukraine, the original homeland of most of these people. Every incarnation of this city of Jerusalem has had one thing in common. It's had a beast political system that has gone in with its military and via war taking the region over. And number 2, it's had the dragon bankers in the background making sure that their desires are fulfilled. And number 3, it's had a religious system attached to it. So this article in the Jerusalem Post, Middle Israel, the other end of the Silk Road. China holds the key to the Iranian regime collapse. To become the world leader it eventually wants and deserves to be, Beijing should turn that key. It was the Iron Curtain of the late Middle Ages, wrote historian Daniel Boorstin, referring to the Ottoman Empire's blocking of European trades from working east of Cairo, Aleppo, and Damascus. The conquest lack of direct trade between Europe and China was disrupted only between 1250 and 1350, when the rare circumstances allowed Italian adventurers, most famously Marco Polo, to join the caravans across Central Asia along the Silk Road. Now, it's possible that Marco Polo was a Khazarian or a Radhanite that allowed him to travel that road. And the circumstances were the rise of the Mongol Empire, which stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Danube River and secured overland travel from Europe to the Far East. Now, this is really important to the book of Revelation, because when we go to Revelation, let's just get back there, 16, the sixth angel pours out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Then I saw 3 impure spirits that looked like frogs. They came out of the mouth of the dragon. Now, why does the Euphrates dry up? To prepare the way for the kings of the east. Now, it could have been literal. The Euphrates has often dried up in times of drought. It could have been a spiritual meaning, as I showed earlier. But the kings of the east, the Mongols, the Mongol invasion of the Levant. Starting in 1240, the Mongols made repeated invasions of Syria, or attempts thereof. Most failed, but they did have some success in 1260 and 1300, which is after the fall of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in 1291 or 99, I think it was. Captured Aleppo and Damascus, and destroying the Ayyubid dynasty, the Mongols were forced to retreat within months each time by the other forces in the area, primarily the Egyptian Mamluks. Since 1260, it had been described as the Mamluk-Ilkhanid War. Sorry about pronunciation. So they had a first invasion. So the 1260 invasion of the Mongols of the Levant. So there's all these Mongolian invasion of the kings of the east. And the final stage is in 1312. The new Khan of the Ilkhanate, Al-Jitu, pursued an aggressive policy to consolidate his rule, subduing the Caspian province of Gilan and destroying the autonomous principality of Herat. Encouraged by the defection of some Syrian emirs, Al-Jitu decided to cross the Euphrates in 1312 to attack the Mamluk Sultanate. He laid siege to the heavily fortified town of Rabat. After about a month of fighting, in which they suffered heavy casualties, the Mongols ultimately failed to take the fortified palace and withdrew. This was to be the last major Mongol incursion into the Levant, as the Mongols says, and the progressive conversion of the Ilkhanate to Islam, the Mongols finally were amenable to ceasing hostilities. So the Mongol invasion of Kiev and Rus. The Mongol Empire invaded and conquered Kiev and Rus in the 13th century, destroying numerous southern cities, including the biggest one, Kiev, 50,000 inhabitants, and Cherniv, 30,000 inhabitants. The only major cities escaping destruction being Novgorod and Pskov, located in the north. The campaign was heralded by the Battle of the Kolka River in May 1223, which resulted in a Mongol victory over the forces of several Rus principalities. The campaign was heralded by the Battle of Kalka River in May 1223, which resulted in the Mongol victory over the forces of several Rus principalities. The Mongols retreated, having gathered their intelligence, which was the purpose of the reconnaissance in force. A full-scale invasion of Rus by Batu Khan followed from 1237 to 1242. The invasion was ended by the Mongol succession process upon the death of Ogedai Khan. All Rus principalities were forced to submit to Mongol rule and became vassals of the Golden Horde, some of which lasted until 1480. The invasion, facilitated by the beginning of the breakup of the Kievan Rus in the 13th century, had profound ramifications for the history of Eastern Europe, including the division of the East Slavic people into three separate nations: modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, and the rise of the Grand Duchy of Moscow. Moscow started its independence struggle from the Mongols by the 14th century, ending the Mongol rule, the so-called Mongol yoke, in 1480, and eventually growing into the Tsardom of Russia. So we can see that the entrance of the kings of the East put a hold on a lot of people's ability to trade and to move between East and West. So it says the commercial wall they took down reappeared once the Mongols disappeared. But the Ottoman builders were not alone in the reactionary venture. The Chinese at the Silk Road's opposite end became so hostile to foreign trade in the 15th century their emperors made foreign travel punishable by decapitation. It was the perfect opposite to the current Chinese policy, which this week made Beijing attack Washington for demanding that it cease buying oil in Iran. China chose insularity when Europe chose worldliness. By sending and following the navigators who reached America, the Pacific, and the Cape of Good Hope. We discussed here previously in different contexts Jerusalem's Orient Express, the 25th of March 2017. This Chinese-European gap became fateful in 1793 when the Qianlong Emperor rejected a British diplomatic delegation's request to establish trade relations. That is how China missed out on the Industrial Revolution, even after given a chance to glimpse its early buds, and that is how China condemned itself to the economic stagnation and military inferiority that ultimately exposed it to foreign rule and communist abuse. Now, an entirely different China emerges as the great champion of global trade, warning that sanctioning Iran's oil buyers would contribute to volatility in the Middle East and in the international energy market. So here's these guys, they're talking about sanctioning energies, and who'll suffer from this? It'll be the people. The good news is that the current Chinese leaders' desire to avoid their forebears' mistakes is sincere, a quest reflected in their urge to resurrect the fabled Silk Road. Now, why is this important at this time? Because we have this dragon that's resurrecting this Jerusalem in Israel, and it's also resurrecting this trade merchant route of the Silk Road that basically fell because of the fall of Jerusalem and the Crusades and the Ottoman Empire. As it said, an iron curtain was placed on that region of the world, and no European traveller or Eastern traveller could cross in between. Basically, Jerusalem was cut out of the world trade, and that crashed the Silk Road, and which then went to the Sea Road. The Radhanite merchants on the Silk Road could no longer control this system because of the Mongol Golden Horde, who blocked their way to controlling this trading belt and took control of the area of Khazaria or Ashkenaz. Then the Ottoman Empire, which put a halt to free trade along this route, and it fell. And they already had established their sea trade, so therefore they found another way around controlling world trade. I believe that what we are seeing today with Ukraine and this big Israel or extended state of Israel that goes all the way to the Ukraine from Israel with the sanctioning of different countries, cutting off of energies to Europe and food supplies, is a way of pushing everybody into this Belt and Road system that they want to resurrect like a phoenix from the flame. And if we look at Revelation again, if we have already experienced this, and this is the situation I'm talking about, is the fall of Jerusalem and the Silk Road. It's Revelation 18, verse 11. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, purple silk, scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, frankincense, of wine and olive oil, of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and human beings sold as slaves. Silk Road, human trade. And what do we have today? Trying to resurrect the Belt and Road with the human trade coming out of the Ukraine, as it did back in the old days. It tells us in Revelation, all of these things will never be heard in her again. With such violence, the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. Music of harpists and musicians, workers of trade, the sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again, the light of a lamp. All of these things, the voice of the bridegroom and the bride, that will never be heard in the city of Babylon. This Silk Road merchants will never rise again. And so we know, if this has happened already, and what I'm saying is true, then this Belt and Road project will never ever get off the road, and Jerusalem and the big Israel will never ever be the capital of what they dream to resurrect from the dead. The dragon and the Gog-Magog empire of the Ukrainian big Israel will never succeed. It says in this article, the good news is that current Chinese leaders' desire to avoid their forebears' mistakes is sincere, a quest reflected in their urge to resurrect the fabled Silk Road. So, let's resurrect the Silk Road and not be bad like our forebears, but let's just lock our people in homes and starve them to death and sell their organs. That's okay. The bad news is that they refuse to see that Iran is to our era's Silk Road what the Ottomans were to theirs. They see it perfectly. The new Chinese interests in the outer world first led to Africa. The other superpowers neglect Black Africa. China turned it into a strategic focus and soon became its largest trade partner, with African-Chinese trade totaling last year 120 billion, 2.26 times its level in 2006, according to the International Monetary Fund. This is because they intend to turn Northern Africa into a food bowl like the Romans did as the weather changes due to the grand solar minimum. And as I've stated in other videos, this is why they've systematically been taking down all the problematic nations in between China and Israel. They've taken down Iraq, they've taken down Libya in North Africa, they've taken down Afghanistan, they've taken down Syria, and all of these nations stand in the way of this Belt and Road project. It's not the leaders of these nations that stand in their way, it's the people. They've had to break the people till they are hopeless. We're starting to see the big picture here now, and that big picture is big Israel. The new Chinese worldliness then spread from Africa to the entire globe through the Belt and Road Initiative, with which Beijing plans to stretch railways, highways and bridges and plant seaport, airports and power stations in more than 150 countries at an estimated overall investment of $4 trillion. With all these planned to straddle the historic Silk Road along the maritime parallels across the Indian Ocean, many have come to suspect that by creating alternatives to American commerce, Atlantic linchpin, China's real aim is to elbow Uncle Sam as the hegemon of global trade. Well, we don't care, because we know your Belt and Road will never get on the road. Such alarmism is both hypocritical and impractical. Hypocritical because China's overseas ventures are welcomed by its partners no less than any Western venture. And I assure you this is totally bollocks, because I know all the Chinese investment in Australia is not welcomed, only welcomed by our politicians. Most countries are families, and those families want investment into their own people. And the fact that our own resources are being sold off to a foreign interest is against our own personal interest to protect our families and to thrive and prosper. No Western grimacing will change Beijing's long overall embrace of the outer world. So we have these dragon bankers with these Khazarian, Turkic followers of Bolshevism, Gog Magog, forming a partnership. Anyway, so we see that the Ottoman Empire was a iron curtain, in quotation marks, to the trade of the Silk Road, which led to pretty much its demise. I'm just going to read this article. It says, why was Jerusalem so important 1,000 years ago? Why Jerusalem? What is it about Jerusalem that makes it essential to the three Abrahamic religions? The short answer is that it and the Levant is at the center of gravity of global trade until the silk and spice trade shifted once more to the sea to be carried in rigged ships, 3 masts carrying square rigs. The construction of competitive Chinese junks with the same tonnage and sail was banned by the Chinese Ming and Manchu dynasties to cut down on smuggling. The opening of China in the Opium Wars spelled the doom of the long overland Silk Road, and the string of powerful dynasties between Korea and Turkey sink into oblivion. The great development of oil exploration and production between the Caspian and Persian Gulf and Libya resurrected much of the dynamics of the movement of bulk in that old ancient world. Unlike in ancient times, the polarity of the movement of trade is from the Middle East outwards instead of silks and spices moving into the area for sale of transshipment. A closer look at the Levant shows the effect of the Great Rift Graben with its parallel ridges, horsed, giving the trench-like appearance of the Levant. The Great Rift, you may recall, goes all the way to Tanzania in a string of large lakes. The Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea, Red Sea, and the lakes of Tanganyika and Victoria are all part of this giant rip in the Earth's crust. Probably what caused the Great Flood, a great earthquake in this rift in the Earth that goes all the way around from the Ring of Fire around the Earth up to this great rift in Israel. And if we have a look here, we have this rift that goes all the way from southern Australia and New Zealand. It goes all the way up around the Ring of Fire, up the east coast of Asia and Japan, across to Alaska, down the west coast of America, South America. This is where we have all this earthquake activity. It goes down South America again back to Antarctica. Now it sort of crosses across here at this point, across to Africa, and it goes up around the east coast of Africa, right up through the Red Sea and up past Africa and Arabia. And when we look at it, it goes directly through the land of Israel. If I zoom in, it goes up this rift here that goes up to the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and this is why this area is so earthquake prone and volcanic prone. It goes up here across the Mediterranean. We have all these earthquakes here and volcanoes up around the Mediterranean and around up to the North Pole. All of these fault lines, it's like the Earth is an egg and it's got a big crack in it. Now, some people believe the Earth is flat. I don't know. I can't prove it. I know that we do have these fault lines, that there are a lot of earthquakes based on these fault lines. I'm kind of more in the camp of the expanding Earth belief, I think that the earth expands and grows bigger. And I believe that, you know, we have this Pangea theory, and they say that the continents all fit in like a jigsaw puzzle, but they don't. What seems to me is that they were once closer together, and the earth is expanded and allowed these waters of the deep to fill the oceans. And I believe that this may have happened around the time of Noah, obviously, and this is what is talked about in the Great Flood. I guess if you want to look at this in the ancient view of the earth on the back of a turtle, or perhaps that the earth is like the shell of a turtle, then this model also fits in with these views of earth's shape also. So the north and south routes within the Levant dominate and are channeled by this horse graben effect until the rift ends at the Taurus Mountains of Turkey and the extension of the mountain complex into Persia as the Zagros. The routes used in ancient trade on the Via Marius in purple, which linked the port cities to the eastern Mediterranean together, which route was heavily used by the Romans as well as the Crusaders. Paralleling the Via Marius is the King's Highway in red, provides a north and south highway extending from Aqaba at the end of the Red Sea all the way to Damascus and to swing east-south around the Arabian Desert. King's Highway provided a parallel line of communication for the Muslims to use when the Via Marius was taken by the Crusaders. It linked Cairo to Baghdad, allowed the movement of troops and supplies. Most of the time in question, the opposite ends of the route were controlled by Muslims hostile to each other. So as I stated in my Silk Road videos, the importance of Jerusalem was its central point to all of these trade routes, and the money and taxes that were coming into this city would have made it a very grand city. Once again, to review the gates, rocks, and hotspots that channeled the movement of goods and firepower from the Far East to the Middle East to the West. Yet even further east, there are powerful pressures and had been for millennia all the way to Korea and Vietnam. The result of wars fought over the control of China spilled over into the great routes from China to the West, creating successive waves of armed fugitives, the first of which was Attila the Hun, followed in time by more successive invaders such as the Mongol invasions of Central Asia, the Middle East, and big parts of Eastern Europe, so making way for the kings of the East. The Mongol raids into the Levant became of particular interest to the Crusaders and their enemies, all of whom feared the Mongols. Terrified is a better word, for the Mongols normally killed everyone they couldn't sell. As Genghis Khan's forces destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, the fleeing Khwarezmian clans worked as mercenaries to the highest bidders. They took Jerusalem and flattened it in 1244, killing or selling all but 2,000 survivors. The dynasty in Egypt and the Levant created by Saladin was hard pressed by the Khwarezmian, who in turn had the Mongols hot on their trail, had a change in management behind the veil, and destroyed the remaining Khwarezmians in 1247. The new management was handled by the commander of the Slav army, Mamluks, Ayberg, in 1250. There was a lot of interesting deal making done between the Crusaders and the Mamluks, in part joined by King Louis of France to make an arrangement about the joint use of Jerusalem, not for the first time. As the Mongol terror continued in 1258 by the sack and destruction of Baghdad and the seizure of major cities in Syria and the Levant, including Damascus, many in their way sought to ally themselves with the Mongols or stay neutral. Some Crusaders in the northern part of the Levant accepted Mongol sovereignty. The Mongols usually moved away shortly, and some fought with the Mongols. The king of Sicilian Armenia supported the Mongols in the sack of Baghdad and in their invasion into the Levant. There was a furtive Franco-Mongolian alliance that the Crusaders wanted, including the Templars, but the Pope forbade it. They watched the Slav Mamluk army defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut in 1260, and the Mongols slowly withdrew from the Levant, but morphed into occupying forces east of Turkey as the Incarnate and north of the Caucasus at the Golden Horde. It would take centuries of warfare by the Ottomans and the Russians to push the descendants of the Mongols back towards Mongolia, save for some hot spots in Pentistan. The enduring questions about the pressure from the east during the entire time of the Crusades, plus the minus 500 years, goes to what was causing all these massive migrations of extremely well-armed and well-disciplined forces that rode down everyone in their way. They all preferred the mounted archer, some more heavily armed and some light. They were all adept at high-speed maneuvering en masse and with complicated maneuvers that the West rarely matched. Each successive wave was faster and meaner than the others before, or maybe the mean got less meaner the more west they went. Topography dictates strategy and tactics to which forces and firepower must accede. So there we have the invasion of the Mongols from the east. We have the reason why Jerusalem is so important as a trading city and how it was destroyed. Jerusalem was destroyed in the Crusades, and the merchants' route of the Silk Road was therefore destroyed. So in ancient history, there is reports of the Dead Sea spewing forth volcanic eruptions. I read this several years back, and I'm just going to read this article here. It says the information in this appendix may be surprising to many people, but it can be shown from the Bible and history that the lake of fire is presently in existence on this earth. At the present, the lake is within one of the periodic quiet cycles, and the fire is not now observed within it, but it is destined to erupt again before the second advent of Christ. Interestingly, this lake was long ago known as the Lake of Fire, and in history it has spewed forth its sulfuric and fiery eruptions in times when God chose to judge sinners for their ways. It will again be used to judge the wicked in Revelation 19:20, and death and Hades are destined to be thrown into it, Revelation 20:14. The early Jewish theologians knew that this lake was a place of judgment, and they mentioned it in the ancient records. The New Testament mentions the existence of the lake, which is destined to become the place of judgment for the beast, the false prophet, and Satan after the millennium, and wicked human beings. It is called the Lake of Fire, or more accurately, the Lake of the Fire. It is the fire which is found in the lake that makes the lake unique, and the fire is the fire of judgment. Fuel that feeds the fire in this lake is brimstone, an old name for sulfur. Is there such a lake on earth today that fits the description of the Lake of Fire? The answer is yes. In fact, the lake has been in existence for at least 4,000 years. People have travelled to the region and have reported seeing fire and columns of smoke ascending from its central sections. Such eyewitness reports have been given from the earliest times. They also have testified to the presence of sulfurous fumes coming from the lake. And one scientist in our modern era has observed a hue of absinthe, the wormwood of Revelation 8:11, hovering on occasion over the lake. Where is this biblical lake located? It is not difficult to discover its whereabouts if one will pay attention to some of the identifying factors associated with the lake. Since the Apostle John in the book of Revelation used the ordinary and simple term for lake, it could be reasonably believed that he had a conventional lake in mind, though he said it was the lake of the fire. Note that the definite article qualifying the word fire, the Apostle John was referring to a lake that had the fire in which was reserved for God's judgment. Secondly, this particular lake had fire associated with it that was fueled by sulfur. In some way, the chemical must be found in its midst. Thirdly, John tells us that the lake will be in existence and active with fire prior to the millennium. Revelation 19:20. This means it will be fully in evidence before the second advent of Christ to this earth. Fourthly, the beast and false prophet who fight against Christ at this advent will be thrown into the lake, since it is made plain in the Bible that the final battle to be fought just prior to the millennium will be at or around Jerusalem. it could reasonably be suggested that the lake would be located in the same vicinity. Indeed, it is plainly shown that the wicked will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment ascends up for the ages of the ages, and they have no rest day or night. This is an exact reference to Isaiah 34:8-10. For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance and the year of recompense for the controversy of Zion. And the streams of Edom shall be turned into pitch, and the dust into brimstone, and the land of Edom shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched day or night, the smoke shall go up for the ages. Not forever, see Hebrew. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. The burning of Edom, an area that borders the southern and southeast portions of the Dead Sea, occur when the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, in Isaiah 34 verse 4. Just like the book of Revelation says will happen at the second advent of Christ, Revelation 6:14, the region of Edom will have its steam beds flowing with rivers of fire. This pitch and brimstone will flow into the Dead Sea, located just east and south of Jerusalem. Since the judgment takes place so near to Jerusalem, it could be reason that the lake of fire was certainly in the vicinity. There is also a fifth point. John says that the lake has the factor of death associated with it. The lake of fire is the second death. This is where Hades, hell, and death are to be cast. So, a major key. There is a prime New Testament reference which goes a long way in solving the identification of the lake of fire. It is found in the book of Jude. The New Testament writer was the brother of James and the half-brother of our Lord. He said that there was in his time an example of eternal fire, age-lasting fire, that was an active and present witness to what the judgment of God would be like in the future. What example was the geographical area where the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah once existed? Jude called attention to the ruined condition of the region, as well as the fire that was still burning in locale. That's right, the area around the ancient cities of Sodom and Gomorrah was still having fires and smoke in the time of Jude. Notice carefully what he said on the matter. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in the manner giving themselves over to fornication, promiscuity, and going over to strange flesh are presently set forth, for an example, are presently suffering the vengeance of age-lasting fire. So Jude verse 7, not eternal fire because the fires have long gone out, see proper Greek understanding. When one looks at the verse closely, it tells us very much about the environment around the Dead Sea as it existed in the time of Jude. There were then active fires and smoke in the area. Strabo, the first century geographer, described the neighborhood as a land of fires. Some of the fires were fed by the seepage of naphtha, an old name for petroleum, bitumen, and other gaseous fumes. 100 years before Strabo, there is the record of a Jewish author who described the Dead Sea area. Wisdom saved a man, Lot, from a destruction of the godless, and he escaped the fire that came on the 5 cities, cities whose wickedness is still attested by a smoking waste. This historical reference indicates that the Dead Sea region was then back at the time still smoking from subterranean fires. Diodorus Siculus, who also lived in the 1st century BC, said, "The fire which burns beneath the ground and the stench rendered the inhabitants of the neighbouring country sickly and very short-lived." A few years later, in the time of Christ's childhood, the Jewish writer Philo gave witness to the burnings and smoke that was still ascending. The fire is most difficult to extinguish and keeps on pervading everything and smouldering, and a most evident proof of this is to be found in which is seen to this day, for the smoke which is still emitted and the brimstone that men dig up there. The fire and smoke was also seen coming from the midst of the Dead Sea as well. The geographer Strabo called the Dead Sea a lake, as did Josephus and the early Jewish historian and described the fiery characteristics which came from the center. In the midst of the lake is a source of the fire, and also there is a great quantities of asphalt in the middle. The eruption is uncertain because the movement of fire have no order known to us, as it is of many other bases. Josephus continues, together with the asphalt there arises a great deal of soot, smoke, and gases invisible to the sight, by which brass, silver, and everything shining, even gold, is tarnished. Around the area were drops of pitch distilling from the rocks and boiling streams. The lake was formed by earthquakes and boiling outbursts of fire, and hot water impregnated with bitumen and brimstone, sulfur. This is from Strabo's book 16, 764. It is interesting to note that the eruptions of fire, smoke, and asphalt were not of continuous duration. Only at irrational times did the phenomena occur, but the occasions were frequent enough that eyewitnesses around the time of Christ and the apostles called it the lake of fire and smoke. In actual fact, we are told by Henry Mondral, who travelled from Europe to Palestine in AD 1697, that most of the map markers prior to the 17th century show smoke ascending above the surface of the water. So this is in Journey, page 454, Bone edition. However, when Mondral visited the area, no smoke was seen by him. Yet the explorer Volney, AD 1787, was told that smoke periodically could be observed coming out of the Dead Sea. The south of Syria, that is the hollow through which the Jordan flows, is a country of volcanoes. The bituminous and sulphurous sources of the lake Asphaltus, the Dead Sea, the lava, the pumice stone thrown upon the banks, and the hot baths of Tiberias demonstrate that this valley has been the seat of subterranean fire, which is not yet extinguished. Clouds of smoke are often observed to issue from the lake, and the new crevices to be formed upon its banks. Volney was very astute observer, and he customarily inquired of the inhabitants about the characteristics of the land that he visited. It seems then that as late as the 18th century there were still some rare outbursts of smoke and fire coming from the middle of the Dead Sea. There have been no actual reporting since that time to my knowledge. It is true, however, that after major earthquakes a great deal of asphalt has broken up in the bottom of the lake and risen to the surface. The lake itself has seemingly been rather quiet of activity over the past 200 years, and it is not erupted as formerly described by those who lived near the time of Christ. The first scientific investigation of the Dead Sea by Lynch in AD 1848 recounted that there was strong smell of sulfurate hydrogen, a fetid sulphurous odour in the night. The north wind was quite fresh and accompanied with the smell of sulphur. Interestingly, this is the very description of some of the factors comprising the lake of the fire and brimstone, sulphur, in the book of Revelation. But of course there was no literal smoke seen by Lynch that he could without doubt vouch for. But he did, however, on one occasion report a strange phenomenon that happened. At one time there appeared to be smoke coming from the centre, though Lynch attributed it to an illusion. What he said, "At one time today, the sea assumed an aspect peculiarly sombre. The great evaporation enveloped it with a thin, transparent vapour, its purple tinge contrasting strange with the extraordinary colour of the sea, and where they blended in the distance, giving it the appearance of smoke from burning sulphur. In the afternoon of the same day, it looked like molten lead. At night, it had the exact hue of absinthe or wormwood." In the book of Revelation, absinthe is called wormwood, Revelation 8:11, which caused waters to become bitter, which the explorer Lynch observed is interesting. The scene gave the impression of smoke from burning sulphur ascending above the surface of the Dead Sea, while parts of the lake gave the appearance of a vast cauldron of molten lead. So we will now show biblical evidence that the Dead Sea is the prophesied lake of fire. Let us recall that Jude said that the area of Sodom and Gomorrah was a present example in Jude's time for the eternal age-lasting fire that God has designed for the punishment of the wicked. The Bible tells us that those cities of which Jude spoke are now under the Dead Sea. The former valley of Siddim, in which the Sodom and Gomorrah were situated, is the Salt Sea. The Dead Sea is part of what is called the Jordan Rift, a great depression or fault line in the earth that starts north of Mount Hermon and continues southerly with the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, and the Dead Sea in the nether region. The rift continues south to the Gulf of Aqaba, the Red Sea into Africa, and extends up near the source of the Nile River. It is the longest known fault line on Earth. From satellite pictures, it is a very prominent feature on the surface of the Earth and well distinguished from other land formations. There is a reason why Jude centered this example on future judgment on the ancient area of Sodom and Gomorrah. To him, the Dead Sea, with the sulphurous smoke and fiery characteristics, was the perfect exemplar given by God for the vengeance upon evil angels and wicked humans. He could simply point to the smoldering cauldron of the Dead Sea and tell the rebellious people that they would finally experience the ravages of that lake of fire, when it would burst forth in a final and catastrophic eruption at the end of the age. Jude could also point to historical examples to substantiate his prophetic beliefs. This prototype of punishment were recorded in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. In fact, Jude's reference to judgment went back before the flood of Noah. Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, was a prophet who foretold even the second advent of Christ, Jude 14. He was also a prophet who gave many warnings of judgment. He even foretold the exact year of the occurrence of the flood of Noah. So what they're saying actually destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah is a meteor. It says reported details how exploding meteor burnt leveled ancient city near the Dead Sea. Sound familiar? An archaeological dig that began in 2005 has resulted in a report published in Nature that details the cataclysm destruction of a city in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea in 1650 BC by the exploding meteor. The explosion, accompanied by intense heat and a shock wave, not only leveled the city but left behind such a quantity of salt that the area could not grow crops and was uninhabitable for approximately 300 to 600 years. Known as a cosmic airburst, the phenomenon is known to have occurred 2 other times, the last in 1908 over Siberia. What makes these meteor events unusual is that the meteor doesn't impact the Earth but explodes a few miles above it. That's why no crater can be found, as typically accompany a meteor's impact, such as the famous one found in northern Arizona near Winslow. Now, we're having these reports from the Dead Sea of rising gases and bitumen, volcanic activity. How do we know this fireball didn't come from the Dead Sea itself and not from an outer space meteor? If there's no impact left behind, there's just this great fireball, and it's possible to me that it's actually come from the Earth itself. Or perhaps it's a combination of a meteor and gases that were released from this Dead Sea area from the lake itself, which has been known to release giant lumps of bitumen and poisonous gases. So the city identified in the report, called Tel el-Hammam, is the biblical city of Sodom, which we know from the Genesis 19 account was destroyed by sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Well, if there was some kind of huge gas ball, then, and it exploded into the atmosphere like an atom bomb. Here it's saying here, flashing through the atmosphere, the rock exploded in a massive fireball about 2.5 miles, 4 kilometers above the ground. The blast was around 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. The shocked city dwellers, who stared at it were blinded instantly. The air temperatures rapidly rose above 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. So clothing and wood immediately burst into flames. Swords, spears, mud bricks, and pottery began to melt. Almost immediately, the entire city was on fire. This would have appeared it was coming out of heaven if it rose into the atmosphere. So what they're likening the explosion at Sodom and Gomorrah to is the meteor explosion in 1908 of the Tunguska Siberian explosion. And ironically, I found this article in relation to swamp gases and explosions, and this is somebody's theory on what happened in Tunguska. And it says Tunguska 1908, the gas pouch and soil fluidization hypothesis. This ties in with the mud flood sort of theories as well. The Siberian taiga explosion of 30th of June 1908 reminds one of the great mysteries of the 20th century. Millions of trees put down over an area of 2,200 kilometers squared, without trace of a crater or meteorite fragments. So this is what's interesting. There is no trace of the meteorite fragments or craters where it landed. 100 years of failed searches have followed, resulting in as many flawed hypotheses which could not offer satisfactory explanations. Meteorite, comet, UFO. In the author's opinion, the cause is that the energy the explorers looked for was simply not there. The author's hypothesis is that a meteoroid encountered a gas pouch in the atmosphere, producing a devastating explosion, its effects being amplified by soil fluidization. In the author's opinion, the reason why the 100 hypotheses put forward to explain the Tunguska event have failed is that they all looked for the energy of the explosion where it is not. In the energy of the cosmic meteoroid. Actually, according to specialists, the meteoroid speed shortly before impact was too low. Airplane designer and geophysicist A.V. Zolotov concluded that the Tunguska object's speed before impact could not have been higher than 1 to 2 kilometers s, too low to produce a thermal explosion. So we have the trajectory of the comet here in this image where it came from the south. A witness saw the meteor associated with the Tunguska event from its noisy entrance in the atmosphere in Chile, near the antipodes of where the explosion took place, until its disappearance out of sight towards the South Pole. Obviously, after having passed through the atmosphere's thicker and thicker strata over half of the Earth's circumference before reaching Siberia, the meteoroid lost a lot of speed. As a matter of fact, according to Professor Felix Y. Ziegel, the witness saw the object in the sky above and heard the noise that followed it simultaneously, which is only possible in the case of a relatively low speed, comparable to the speed of sound. Nonetheless, in the morning of the 30th of June 1908, an apocalyptic explosion devastated the Siberian taiga, destroying the forest and setting it on fire over an area of 2,200 kilometers squared. If the object, whether meteoroid, comet, globular lightning, black hole, antimatter, alien ship, etc., could not have exploded, then what did actually explode? So the disaster looks as if it had been caused by a hot pouch of compressed air, which the meteor was pushing in front of itself. According to Leonard Kulik, we rather think it was a large gas pouch which the meteor met on its way. I saw a giant ball of fire covering almost the entire sky, witnesses and local farmer Semen Semenov used to say. Now remember, gas rises and it's lighter than oxygen. So, we have these elements in our periodic table, and they range from heaviest to lightest, being the gases. It goes on to say, the hypothesis is, according to our hypothesis, let us call it Hypothesis 101, somewhere in the still little known world of small planets that gravitate between Mars and Jupiter, a powerful collision of two asteroids takes place at one point. As a result, a piece of asteroid with a more friable structure dislocates and is headed towards our planet by chance. It is the ball of fire many of the eyewitnesses saw crossing the Siberian sky in the morning of the 30th of June 1908. At a certain altitude, the object meets a large gas pouch and produces that devastating explosion. What I saw then, Kulik wrote, when he visited the site exceeded the descriptions in all the eyewitness reports, as well as all my own expectations. The trees preserved the trace of a fire started from above, and all the evidence indicated that it started instantly with a very high intensity on a very large area. The fire must have been a short-lived fire nonetheless, as most trees were not incinerated, an argument used by the followers of the atomic explosion theory, but suffered superficial burning that can still be seen. Even after decades covering a very large area, the fire burned the oxygen very fast, and because of this, it suddenly lost its intensity and stopped. It is obvious that this kind of fire could not have been caused by anything else but a very large gas pouch covering a wide area whose blast simply disintegrated the meteor that produced the explosion. Perhaps the meteor wasn't that big. Who knows? So, the source of the fire should be traced back to those very local conditions, which curiously were not taken into account by any of the hypotheses. As it is well known, spring in Siberia north of 60 degrees north is very short, and the meteor of 30th of June 1908 happened to fall here exactly in the beginning of summer, when all the swamps in the region, covering thousands of square kilometers, the southern swamp, the swamps to the west close to longitude 100 degrees east, etc., have already defrosted, releasing in the atmosphere a very relatively short amount of time a large quantity of swamp gas, methane gas. See footage of Kulik's explanations, Salt of the Earth TV series, etc. Another source of this gas could have been the underground, according to engineer D. Timofeyev, because nearby a low-pressure gas layer was previously discovered, of which an estimated 0.25 to 2.25 billion cubic meters could have reached the surface. If the temperature is unusually high, gas may come from thawing permafrost, which contains large amounts of methane hydrates. So this region in Tunguska is a swamp area. They mine for gases and oils there, so it's very similar to the region of the Dead Sea that has been known for its tar pits and its volcanic activity. Regardless of its source, the gas once in the atmosphere started stratifying at a certain altitude. See the phenomena at the end of the year 1988 for California and Oregon. They're referring to a magazine here, I think. The mechanism of gas forming in a pouch that would have the necessary concentration to detonate 5% is enough. Specialists say could be explained by Russian scientists Akad, Andrei Monin, and Professor Grigory Barenblatt. According to their theory, the terrestrial atmosphere, just like the hydrosphere, is a stratified environment in permanent commotion. At the borders between these strata, internal waves appear which cause an intense vortex-like movement. These turbulences lead to atmospheric formations, hydral respectively, which are metastable and can clearly be differentiated through their properties, density, pressure, temperature, etc., from their environment. Experiments have revealed that inside these formations, turbulence can be 100 times higher than around them, and that these formations have the property that they can preserve their energy longer, making them more stable if their size is larger. Obviously, the size of the gas pouch in 1908 must have been huge if we consider the resulting devastation. It must have preserved its features long enough to make the encounter with the meteoroid possible and cause the explosion. Nature is full of surprises which sometimes defy every theoretical evaluation. For instance, in 1987, American scientists discovered totally by chance that a large-sized water pouch coming from the Mediterranean reached the Bahama Islands more than 6,000 kilometers away from Gibraltar. The lenticularly shaped water pouch, 500 meters thick and 100 kilometers in diameter, managed to cross the Atlantic, preserving its features for almost 5 years. This water pouch, as well as gas pouch we claim to be responsible for the Tunguska event, is manifestation of the same mechanics of fluids. So, soil fluidization. In addition, it is my opinion that on top of the explosion, another set of facts could have contributed to the destruction of the Siberian taiga. One of them, less known, is the soil fluidization recently discovered by American scientists. The phenomenon happened when a terrain soaked with water is subject to strong vibrations produced by a seismic event. Then specialists say the soil compresses, creating an increase in the pressure of phreatic waters. When this pressure equals the external pressure, the soil dissociates and seems to liquefy, acting similar to quicksand. That explains why sometimes during earthquakes, isolated houses or even entire neighborhoods can be swallowed by the ground, as was the case in some neighborhoods of Mexico City during 1985 earthquake. In Siberia, most certainly all the conditions were present required for this phenomenon. Most of the trees were laid down with their roots out rather than being broken by the explosion. According to Kulik, the land was showing undulations comparable to certain large waves in the ocean. Those waves in the soil that had never been explained before could only have been created in a soil that suddenly lost its consistency, which is precisely what happens in the case of soil fluidization, as it may have occurred immediately before the explosion. Under the conditions, putting down that many trees does not really require an atomic explosion, and Professor Ziegel should perhaps reconsider his conclusion that any chemical explosion must be excluded from the explanation. As far as involved energy is concerned, past years' disasters by gas explosions in Siberia, Baskira, June 1989, Komi, April 1995, or Southern Korea, though much smaller in proportion, may convince one that at a larger scale, the detonation of a gas pouch can take the proportions of an atomic explosion. Possible answers to other questions. The detonation of the gas pouch, in which the shock wave crosses the explosive environment with speed of tens of kilometers per second, producing sudden increase in pressure and temperature, causing the exothermic reaction being produced in front of the wave, explains the high temperature and out-of-this-world force of the explosion. Soil fluidization explains why the trees were lying down with their roots out of the soil. The wave shape of the soil and the appearance of new phreatic waters and swamps. As one witness put it, the land suddenly rose and dropped quickly like one huge ocean wave. It has been suggested that more than one explosion was involved. A. Zoltov estimates this at least 3 sources of explosion. If true, this could be explained by the existence of multiple gas clouds that exploded in a chain reaction. This could also explain the asymmetric shape of the explosion. Now, in the Sodom and Gomorrah explosion, sulfur and ash rained down on the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So during his 1998 trip to Israel, Jordan, Sinai, Ron White, our tour leader, took us to the ruins of Gomorrah destroyed by fire with Sodom at the time of Abraham and Lot some 4,000 years ago. So when we look at the ruins that they saw in the Sodom and Gomorrah region, there's what looks like buildings. They're made of ash, and there's sulfur balls embedded amongst this ash. So it says here in this article, lab analysis of the ash. Being a chemist myself, I tested the sample I had brought back to the USA in my lab. This revealed that the sample had two major components: ash, elemental sulfur. Other items found occasionally were rocks with some sulfur deposit, pebbles, and charcoal. It says the presence of sulfur in the ash is unmistakable. It occurs as small granules as well as large chunks, sometimes round as large as an egg, often encased. These sulfur balls are pale yellow, unlike normal sulfur, which is clear yellow. Also, these balls are light and are easily crushed into powder when pressed. Interestingly, my PhD thesis at the University of Washington, Seattle was on elemental sulfur and its reaction. However, I had only used orthohombic sulfur, which are yellow crystals. The sulfur allotropes I have seen, monoclinic, amorphous, etc., did not look like the sulfur balls. These sulfur samples I tested were all orthorhombic, but not crystalline form. The sulfur ball I tested floated in water and had a specific gravity of 0.9, water 1.0. Common sulfur has a specific gravity of 2.0. A small piece cut from the ball was burned in an open flame. As typical, the sulfur melted into a dark reddish viscous liquid. Then it caught fire and burned with a bluish flame. The pungent gas, sulfur dioxide, smell of burnt matches was released. There was a red-orange residue left on the porcelain spatula. This could be iron oxide, either left in the sample or formed by oxidation from some iron-containing material left in the sulfur during the heating. Another sample I cut from the exterior was almost pure sulfur and did not give the reddish residue. Only some greyish ash was left. Another sample was heated and in a crucible avoiding flame, and the reddish liquid could be seen more easily. So it goes on to say, how were the sulfur balls created? Sulfur balls of the type I described are very rare. Sulfur deposits found near volcano mouths are in the deposited form. I have visited some regions in Italy with such formations. The ash found in the Sodom and Gomorrah site is peculiar too. In most places, the ash consists of silicate material. I have some Mount St. Helens ash samples. What I speculate is the following. Sodom and Gomorrah and the three cities were destroyed by massive ground eruptions in the valley of Siddim. Okay, so present Dead Sea. The Dead Sea area had tar pits according to Genesis 14:10, when it was called the Valley of Siddim. Since the Dead Sea itself is believed to have been formed during the catastrophe, it is possible that, like Pompeii, the surrounding cities were overwhelmed by the fire, brimstone and ash from the explosions. The actual explosion would be in the region of the Dead Sea, which is a deep pit. So its northern banks is 300 feet below sea level, and the bottom of the sea is another 300 foot further below at the northern end. During biblical times, there have been minor eruptions under the Dead Sea with sulfurous fumes, but for the last 200 years it has been quiet. There is indication, however, according to biblical prophecy, that it may become active again towards the end times, where God judges the earth. The Dead Sea would finally be filled with living water. During the ground explosions, the Valley of Siddim was broken up and limestone was shattered and pulverized. These shot up in the sky along with sulfurous gases and steam. The Bible does say that dense smoke like from a furnace was seen by Abraham the next morning. This reminds us of Revelation 9:12, that out of the depths of the bottomless pit came smoke from a great furnace, an event yet to happen. It is important to realize that this catastrophic event was caused by divine wrath. It was not just another natural event. During normal volcanic eruptions, there is always the release of steam. Now, I'm no scientist and I know barely anything about geology, but most meteors are made of iron oxide. Iron oxide nodules or concentrations are the most common kind of meteor sent to us. Hermite and magnite are two common iron oxide materials. Most iron ore deposits consist mainly of hermite, magnite, or both. So a lot of meteors are made from iron oxide. And in this article about the sulfur, this man tells us that there are concentrations of iron oxide within the sulfur and ash. So I'm just thinking that perhaps what's happened here in Sodom is like what happened in Tunguska, that we had some kind of massive release of these gases from the bottom of the Dead Sea, or from this region, because it is earthquake prone and there is volcanic activity not far from this area. And what has happened is that perhaps a meteorite has hit this gas, and in the explosion, which has been of intense heat, through this heat has created these sulfur balls that rain down what appeared from heaven. Now, this is just my hypothesis, and as I said, I'm no scientist, so I might be wrong, but when we look at sulfur formation from natural gas, it's actually quite common. So we have a picture here. It's from the Oil and Gas Journal. Technology S8 threatens natural gas operations environment. Andre Bernard Chesnoy, hydrocarbons production consultant, Paris. David J. Pack, gas measurement consultant, Perth, WA. A 200mm ANSI 600 turbine meter is coated with elemental sulfur in figure 1. So here we have it here, coated in elemental sulfur. Elemental sulfur coats a pressure control valve quick opening cage. The presence of elemental sulfur in natural gas can give serious consequences for gas production, processing and pipeline operations, yet no reliable means exist to analyze a gas stream for its presence. So in these natural gases, we have sulfur dioxide, and what they're doing is transporting them in these pipelines under pressure, which is causing the pipelines to coat up with elemental sulfur. So in this article is from the Oil and Gas and Energy ADI Analytics, sulfur removal options for natural gas operations. Sulfur removal technologies are used in regions producing natural gas with high sulfur content. It's called sour gas and swamp gas, basically. Typically greater than 100 ppm. Here it says, typically produces a sour gas that has higher sulfur levels as compared to other shale plays. Operators install sulfur removal units to reduce flaring of acid gases that might limit natural gas production in anticipation of reaching SO2 emission permits. So what they're doing is removing the sulfur from this gas. Sulfur removal units of varying level of capacity are used along the entire oil and gas value chain. And how they're doing it is, so it says upstream operators use either solid or liquid scavengers to treat the sour gas before it enters transmission pipelines. Solid scavengers comprise a fixed bed system filled with absorbent material that are typically metal oxides of zinc, copper, or iron. So, you know, we have this sulfur in Sodom. It says here about the sulfur at Sodom, it says in nature, pure sulfur in a volcano, but not in the form of fine sulfur dust pressed. The volcanoes are located crystalline sulfur of high purity, calm at 99%. Sulfur, which was found in places all 5 cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, in fine powder compressed into a sphere in a burnt capsule. Sulfur is found with a purity up to 98%. There have been many sulfur analyses of samples throughout the world. All experts who were able to test the sulfur stated that these samples are completely unique. Tests can be viewed in the gallery. So, is it possible that the reason that these sulfur shapes are balls is because they've been heated intensely in a gas ball, an instantaneous high heat explosion, that this natural gas, while the meteor exploded with the iron oxide, created these sulfur balls that rained down on Sodom. As I said, I'm no scientist. I've got no idea. It's a complete hypothesis. You would think that the same thing would have happened in Tunguska if that's the case, and I can't find any evidence of sulfur balls there, but they have said that the rocks there are infused with sulfur in some articles I read. But, you know, each gas is unique and each environment is unique, so who knows? It could have been a meteor, which is, they're saying it was a meteor that did this, but not just a meteor, because there's no evidence of a meteor crater or, you know, residue from a meteor in Sodom, as well as Tunguska, but it could have been a combination of the gas, a meteor hitting the gas, and, you know, that plays into the idea of predestination, that although this was a natural event, it was a very organized event. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent on this, but it's just very interesting that the Dead Sea is referred to by biblical people, biblical writers at the time, to be the lake of the fire, and that perhaps it may react again. Who knows? Perhaps it had already acted up in the time of the Crusaders, and I cannot find any historical evidence of that except for people talking about bitumen and gases or smoke rising from the Dead Sea. If this has happened, then it's something that has been covered up or will be extremely hard to find. There is this Ezekiel prophecy about the Dead Sea coming to life here in this article, but perhaps one of the stranger mentions is in the end time prophecy by Ezekiel that one day the Dead Sea will come back to life. Its dead, putrid waters will be healed. Then he said to me, these waters go out towards the eastern region and go down to the Arabah. Then they go towards the sea, being made to flow into the sea, and the waters of the sea become fresh. It will come about that every living creature which swarms in every place where the river goes will live. There will be very many fish, for these waters go there and the others become fresh. So everything will live where the river goes. This is Ezekiel 47, 8-9. So what are the bizarre things that are starting to take place in the Dead Sea? There is life showing up along the edges of the sea. One of the major sources of water for the Dead Sea is the Jordan River, where there are fish in the river, but they turn back at the Dead Sea. However, with farmers using the Jordan River for irrigation, the flow into the sea is substantially reduced. This, combined with the evaporation, has resulted in the Dead Sea shrinking by a meter a year. In the midst of the dramatically reduced shoreline, sinkholes are showing up, and this is where it gets strange. Some are filled with fresh water and are so big they even have fish in them. Below is a video showing some of the sinkholes numbering in the thousands with fish in them. So, you know, if this is a prophecy in Ezekiel, I think God would fulfill this prophecy fully by making the whole thing fresh water and not just some sinkholes. But who knows, it may be changing.
Biblical end of days prophecy comes true as fish swim again in Dead Sea. A biblical prophecy may be coming true after fish were spotted swimming in the Dead Sea, mirroring prophet Ezekiel's vision. Ezekiel is a key figure in the Bible, and in his end of days prophecy, he foresees the Dead Sea flourishing into life, something that is considered to be impossible due to its high salt content. Israeli photojournalist Noam Badin has reported sightings of marine life in small sinkholes around the Dead Sea, as well as vegetation growing. Photos released by the Dead Sea Revival Project show tiny fish swimming in water that is reportedly from the highly salinated body of water. Mr. Badin, who works on the Dead Sea Revival Project, which works to preserve the sea and other Israeli water treasures, said the fish prove the water is anything but dead. It is also reportedly evidence of a biblical miracle coming true. The Bible states that after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the land was turned into a barren wasteland, the same area the Dead Sea is now, but it was prophesied that life would once again return to the land, with fish in abundance in the water, coming to the Dead Sea, the lowest point on earth. You see prophecy coming true, Mr. Badin told Breaking News Israel, a place that was once cursed in biblical times. Now you can come here to the Dead Sea, explore the sinkholes and see fish where the water has receded, fulfilling prophecies from Ezekiel, who talked about the land flourishing and blooming when the Jews returned. He continued, the curse is over, and this place and its minerals are now bringing life to people around the world.
So I'll leave it there. I don't put much attention into a lot of these fulfilled Ezekiel prophecies coming out of Israel. They like to pretend that somehow the modern nation of Israel is fulfilling prophecy, and I won't believe that the Dead Sea is come to life until I see it abundant with fish in the actual sea itself and not in the sinkholes where perhaps people could have planted a few fish before they died. Anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.